Hello, my name is Thea Maria Carlson, and I'm a biodynamic land steward in Northern California in the United States. And this land was stewarded since time immemorial by the Wapo people, indigenous people here on this land, until about 150 years ago when European colonizers came to take over the land. And one of the things that we've been learning is that for tens of thousands of years, the people and the land existed with fire. And since Europeans came to this part of the world, the fire has been suppressed. So for about 50 years, this land has been stewarded by an intentional community called Monan's Rill, and I've been here for about 6 years. And I want to talk to you about how we are dancing with fire as we breathe with the climate crisis. So the plants in this landscape, manzanita, chamise, oak trees, they're all adapted with fire. They have grown to live with fire, and also the indigenous people used fire to maintain the health of the landscape. But over the past 150 years, there was a perception that all fire was bad, and so fire was suppressed. And what that has led to increasingly over recent years is, with climate change and hotter, drier summers, not enough rainfall, stronger winds, combined with all the fuel that's built up over all those decades and over a century, really, of fire suppression, has led to very devastating wildfires. And although we've been preparing for wildfire here for a number of years, it still didn't protect us from being hit very dramatically by wildfire in September 2020. So I want to share with you some of the ways that we are learning to live with fire and to use fire as a tool to maintain the health of this landscape and also make it so that we can live here long term. So this garden has been the heart of the community at Monan's Rill for over 40 years. And these beds have been tended by many hands. It's been a place that people come together to talk, to grow food, to nourish each other. And in the fire, we're grateful that most of the garden beds themselves were spared because there was some moisture in the soil. But you can see all around some of the devastation from the wildfire. There was a home over there. Our wood chipper was burned, the back garden shed. Over here was our greenhouse and another garden shed with all of our tools and seeds and amendments. So in some ways we're starting from scratch, but we still have the health of the soil, which is of course the most important part. So we'll be starting from the soil. There are many plants that are already coming back on their own, and we'll be rebuilding with the garden still as the heart of the community. So this meadow has been the pasture for animals, horses, cows, llamas, sheep, and most recently goats. So this has been the main home for the animals that are part of the farm organism here. And at the time of the fire, we had 3 goats in the pasture, and they survived the fire in the pasture, but it was pretty traumatic for them. The whole pasture was black. And you can see the trees all around the pasture mostly burned, but luckily the oak trees are fire adapted, so they still have green leaves and they will still be fine. And this meadow is also home to a lot of wildlife. This is a vernal pool that is home to thousands and thousands of frogs, and we're very grateful to hear them coming back as the rains have filled the pond again. So when a wildfire comes through an area where humans have been, one of the challenges is the toxins that come out of burned buildings. So here, where our barn was, there was a whole structure and many building materials that burned, and in those building materials there are toxins that are now in the ash. And then when we have our winter rains, those get picked up by the rain and flow across the landscape. So these wattles are something we installed to protect the soil and protect the water, so they'll absorb those toxins as they're flowing across the landscape. And in addition to the straw in these wattles, we've inoculated them with oyster mushroom mycelium. And so the oyster mushrooms have a wonderful capability to immobilize toxins and actually transmute them so they become less toxic. So this is a way that we're protecting the watershed, the immediate watershed here and the watershed downstream from the toxins in buildings. Another way that we were helping regenerate the land after the fire is the practice of using the biodynamic preparations. And we've been stirring and spraying biodynamic preparations and using them in our compost piles ever since I came to Monensville 6 years ago. And it's an important tool for remediating the land and bringing life back to the soil after the fire. So as soon as there was some moisture in the first rains after the fire, I came back to the land and stirred and sprayed horn manure and barrel compost all over the land to help bring life back to the soil, which the top layer has been sterilized by the fire, so it helps to enliven the soil after the fire. So since colonization and European domination of this land, most of the landscape of California looks more like this, or before fire looks like this. So the brush hasn't been cleared, the forest hasn't been thinned. There's a idea that if we just leave nature alone, it will be fine. But that leads the understory to become choked and a huge accumulation of fuels when there's a fire that comes through. Over here you can see treatment that we've been doing on this land for a number of years, where the understory has been thinned, the trees have been limbed up, and then we actually brought in a prescribed fire in 2019. So we intentionally burned this land with a low and slow burn to regenerate the ecosystem and also to protect the forest. And so when the wildfire came through in 2020, it came from this direction. You can see it burned really hot through all the neighbors' land. And then when it got to where we had burned in 2019, about 15 months before, it just went around. So all of this area did not ignite, it didn't burn. Any of the black you can see was from the prescribed burn, but you can see the trees are still healthy and the understory is still healthy. And so as we look forward in how we're working with this land, we're intending to do a regular regime of prescribed burns so that we can keep all of the land healthy and be ready for the next wildfire when it comes through. So as we breathe with the global climate crisis, so many of us are facing this extreme expression of fire in wildfires. And as we learn to live with that fire, to dance with that fire, we need to turn towards it and understand how we can partner with fire to bring health to the landscapes and safety to ourselves. I'm so grateful to the indigenous people who have had relationships with the land for so long, who are now willing to share the technologies they have developed to steward the land with fire.